By August of 1776, the largest expeditionary force Great Britain had ever assembled was bearing down on New York. General William Howe commanded a highly disciplined army of 20,000 professional soldiers. To meet this massive threat, George Washington attempted to fight a traditional European war, anchoring his own 20,000 men in static, entrenched defensive lines. But Washington hesitated. Gripped by indecision over where the main British strike would land, he divided his forces. He left thousands of his raw, under-trained troops dangerously dispersed across a series of rigid, forested ridges in Brooklyn. This chart shows exactly how the British exploited those static positions. While a frontal assault pinned the Americans in place, Howe marched 10,000 troops through a hidden fourth pass, sweeping directly behind the Continental line. The trap snapped shut. Surrounded by charging Hessian mercenaries, American discipline evaporated into panic. Except for a few regiments fighting a desperate rear-guard action, who were ultimately cut to pieces, the army routed, suffering a devastating 10-to-1 casualty ratio. Pitting static, textbook defensive formations against a vastly superior, highly mobile enemy had created a strategic death trap for the rebellion. The disaster in Brooklyn triggered a relentless cascade of defeats throughout the autumn. Washington was forced to abandon New York entirely, and shortly after, an intense fire consumed nearly a quarter of the city. It was a heavy blow with winter approaching. The situation worsened at Fort Washington. Paralyzed by indecision, Washington dithered on whether to evacuate, leaving a large garrison isolated and exposed. 8,000 British troops stormed the fort, capturing or killing every single defender inside. The psychological toll of these crushing defeats was immense. Desertion rates skyrocketed as morale crashed, and the colonial population sank into deep apathy, assuming the war was already lost. This chart illustrates the true operational crisis. After months of retreating across New Jersey, the Continental Army suffered a precipitous drop, bleeding from 20,000 men down to fewer than 6,000. With enlistments expiring, a hard deadline loomed on December 31st. By attempting to fight a formal conventional war against the British Empire, Washington had lost his territory and pushed his entire army to the mathematical brink of extinction. By late December, the remaining Continentals were freezing, starving, and out of options. Washington realized that if he continued to play by the standard rules of warfare, his army would die in the snow. He abandoned conventional strategy entirely, embracing an extreme, unorthodox risk. He planned a highly complex, multi-pronged offensive strike on Christmas Day, driving right into the teeth of a severe winter blizzard. The operation required ferrying 2,400 men, horses, and heavy artillery across the nearly 300-yard expanse of the Delaware River in pitch darkness, fighting against strong currents and heavy, jagged ice. Looking at this map of the attack, you can see how the severe weather actually worked to his advantage. The raging blizzard acted as natural camouflage, blinding the Hessian defenders in Trenton and allowing the American forces, splitting into two wings, to silently surround the town. Shortly after dawn, the Americans charged. In less than an hour of shock combat, the surprised Hessians suffered 100 casualties and saw 900 captured. The Americans counted only 5 wounded. By completely discarding the orthodox seasonal rules of European combat, Washington weaponized the brutal winter environment, turning a severe tactical disadvantage into a crushing victory. The British command immediately moved to counter this success. General Howe dispatched Lord Cornwallis with 8,000 troops to hunt down the Continentals and pin them against Assunpink Creek. Cornwallis halted his advance at nightfall, assuming he would easily finish off the trapped Americans in a traditional battle the next morning. But Washington refused to wait for a conventional slaughter. Instead, he executed a silent withdrawal. He ordered his men to slip away in the dead of night, leaving their campfires burning brightly to convince the British sentries that the army was still dug in. Moving in total silence over rough terrain, the American army completely bypassed Cornwallis's front line. By sunrise, they had marched directly into the British rear to strike the exposed garrison at Princeton. The resulting victory cost the British another 400 casualties. It proved that the triumph at Trenton was no fluke. Washington had developed a replicable strategy relying on extreme mobility, stealth, and misdirection. These sudden, unorthodox victories gave Washington the leverage he needed to keep his army together. He convinced his exhausted veterans to extend their enlistments, preventing the Continental Army from dissolving at its most critical moment. By substituting speed and audacity for static defense, the Americans demonstrated they could survive the initial British onslaught. The focus shifted from holding ground to maintaining an active, dangerous force in the field. This resilience caught the attention of foreign observers. In the royal courts of France and Spain, officials began to take notice of a rebellion that refused to be extinguished by conventional means. Washington's evolution into an unpredictable tactician secured the survival of his army during its darkest hour. This persistence kept the rebellion alive, ensuring it would eventually grow into a conflict that could draw in global allies.